So, welcome and everybody, and thank you for joining our Women for Solutions webinar today. We're going to be truly inspired with incredible speakers, and our topic today is the social finance special on the importance of food sovereignty for women farmers. This is key, and our guest speakers are Sandy McClure, Director of Philanthropy and Partnership of Global Greengrants UK, and our moderator today is Servane Mouazan. She is founder of Ogunte. A few more seconds more about Women for Solutions, formerly Be Women Solution. We are a global network of thousands of women entrepreneur and intrapreneur in over 40 countries that seek to balance purpose and profits in the markets. And our whole idea is to lead towards the caring economy. That is an economic system that focuses primarily on the wellness of people and planet. On that, our Women for Solutions empowering move is to put your shoulders back, your chin up, and with a super wide smile, let me pass the call to our moderator, Servane Mouazan, founder of Ogunte and founding member of the UKB Corp. Also, she connects and amplifies the women's social entrepreneurship ecosystems. Servane, the line is all yours.
Thanks, Laura. I can't say anything more about myself because you've done it all for me. Thank you so much. Very kind of you. So today we are talking about social finance and a specific field in social finance. As you know, it's a very vast ecosystem. It's not just about equity or loan. It's also grant finance and concessionary finance. So we're going to have that special times with Sandy McClure from Global Greengrants Fund and the UK branch. She's going to take us around the world and around the time and the years and of activity and talk about her partnerships and all the ethos and all the how you do that work, because it's fascinating and it's very timely, isn't it, Sandy? Doing some work around climate and women, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Can you tell us more about who you are first, so that people can know about your background briefly?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So as Laura said, I'm Director of Philanthropic Partnerships, which is a bit of a mouthful, even I can't say it, at Global Greengrants Fund UK. But for the past 20 or so years, I've been working in the field of human rights and international development. And so I came to Global Greengrants really from that background, and I've been 2 years with Global Greengrants now. So yeah, bringing that lens to the environmental work. And as we will discuss, it's all very much connected.
So your life took you to Nepal, Afghanistan. Where else did you travel around, from what I know?
So I worked for Amnesty International. That took me to Africa. So I've traveled around Africa quite a lot. But yeah, and I lived in Japan for 5 years and traveled around Asia in my younger years too. So yeah, I feel very privileged to have been able to see parts of the world.
So I think we'll see throughout the hour how that informs as well the work you do and how it helps you resonate with all the people you meet through Global Greengrants. Could tell us more about what Global Greengrants Fund is doing.
Sure. So Global Greengrants Fund is a global environmental organization. It's 27 years old this year. And so we have two funds, two sisters, if you like. We have our US organization based in Colorado, and then we have our UK sister here, which is 5 years old. So we are the little sister. But basically, we as an organization, global organization, support what we call grassroots community solutions to environmental degradation, to climate change all around the world. We do this by making small grants of around £4,000 that go directly to the community, so directly into the hands of people who need it. And these are people who are already addressing these issues, and who are at a moment where they need financial support, basically, to implement their ideas and their solutions.
Mm-hmm.
To give you an idea of scale, last year we made 1,000 grants globally.
Mm-hmm.
But since we've started, we've made 14,000.
So the
so
£4,000, which is around $5,000 US dollars, I imagine in some places it's quite a significant amount of money for a small grassroots organization, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And it may not sound a lot, but it goes a long way in the kinds of contexts and geographies that we work, which I can talk a little bit about later. And then we have a network of 150 local advisors around the world who basically identify the groups that we fund. And the advisors are from the communities we serve. So they have the lived experience, as well as the cultural knowledge, the place-based knowledge. They also have learned experience. So they have professional day jobs, and they do this as a volunteer role on top. Wow. So they are very passionate people, amazing people, who are knowledgeable about the environment, but are also very connected into the local communities. And I think it's those ingredients that make Global Greengrants model so effective.
Right. And so I guess, purpose-driven, good network everywhere in the world, significant sum of money for small grassroots organization in certain parts of the world, and actually, and a lot of love.
Exactly. Maybe we can show them the map.
Let me show it
just
for
to
you.
give a flavor of, thank you, of where we made grants last year. As you can see, we are in most geographies around the world. And this just shows you the breadth and the scale of where we are working, and often in remote and rural, with rural communities actually that are often not linked into government services, often overlooked. And I think our role, we are what's called an intermediary fund. So basically we are kind of a bridge for other donors and funders who can't reach those people who are most in need.
So people can't apply directly to you, is that correct? That you have your people on the ground, or you receive as well direct application.
And so, for example, I don't make those decisions on where the funding goes. It's all done by our local advisors.
Right. Okay.
Which means that that basically is how we can be more efficient as a grant maker. But it also means that there's technical expertise that our grantees can then be linked into. So our advisors also kind of support the grantees through the implementation of the project, and give them technical advice on environmental issues as and when they need it, and link them to other resources as well.
Right. This is a model. This is a model that is kind of growing at the moment, with having direct people on the ground to really inform investment committees or grant committees to how to make these decisions, or they are making the decision themselves. Yeah.
So, I mean, this model is called participatory grant making, which is becoming more and more understood. Why this is so important, that local people are taking the lead and local people are making the decisions, not sort of white middle class me and sitting in London who knows nothing about the context. But the model was originally deliberately set up in that way to shift the power, and have that bottom up view rather than an external interventionist view. So this way, you're right, those decisions are made on the ground, but the advisors come together in advisory boards, which are either regionally organized or country organized. So for example, in Africa, we have a West Africa board, Southern Africa board, East Africa board.
It's quite big region still, isn't it?
Yeah, 4 or 5 advisors come together twice a year, and they sort of peer review each other's grant making. But there's also a strategy for grant making in each region, where obviously the context and the issues around the environment are different.
Mm-hmm. So from what you've just said, you were a pioneer in that one of the pioneers in participatory grant making. On the social finance spectrum, it's clear now that you're not making loans, or you don't have, it's a sort of grant systems. Yeah.
And I think that's where we're different, and that it's a grant, we're not expecting any repayments, and it's trust-based. We're trying to get rid of that bureaucracy and red tape that prevents a lot of communities from accessing funding. So this model allows us to get money directly to the people who need it. And we're not asking them to learn how to fill out, you know, an application form or become fundraisers. We're asking them to resolve and just get on with implementing their solutions.
Right. And as they are the experts on the ground, it's about the job they're doing, not spending
exactly.
time filling form. Okay.
People know what they need, they know their own contexts. And I think that's crucial to this model as well, a trust-based.
Right. That reminds me of the flow funding. Do you remember? Have you seen that? Which is by the Rockefeller family. So maybe not. It's not the first name you would think about, but they've got that kind of. They enable a whole team of people on the ground to decide jointly which of them will receive the fund, and they distribute sort of a small amount of money, and they've got sort of a learning as well to share about did the money do the job, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think over the last 27 years since this was set up, there have been other models, you're right, around participatory grant making that look slightly different to how we operate. But it's great. People are experimenting with this model. And you know, allowing local people to make those decisions and take the lead, which moving in the right direction.
This is healthy, and it sounds great. Very it's powerful. So we just talk about these 27 years. Like, what have been the significant moments in the Global Green Grant Fund history?
Oh, well, I think there's been many.
In a nutshell, yes.
Yeah, I think there's been quite a few, but I'm just going to pick up on 2. I think the first one really is globally when Global Green Grants reached 10,000 grants, having made 10,000 grants. I think it was in 2016. I think that was hugely significant because it really kind of celebrated in a way how much the organization had developed and grown over that time. And it was, and its achievements, I think. And then secondly, as GGF UK, we've only been around 5 years, as I mentioned, but last year we were chosen by The Guardian and Observer Christmas Charity Appeal as one of their chosen charities to fight climate change and to support our work, particularly with Indigenous people in the Amazon. So we were absolutely thrilled by that, to have that endorsement from The Guardian means such a lot to us, and obviously to the communities we support. So I think those 2, I think, would probably be the highlights.
This is great. Well done for that. I know you're going to give us a couple of stories as well, so that people understand what kind of people are actually on the ground and doing that work in a few minutes. So let's go deep into our topic, the importance of food sovereignty. What does it mean, food sovereignty?
Yeah, it's a word you don't come across really, sovereignty, is it, very often, but I think essentially it's about our relationship with food, which ties us to the land, to our landscapes, and the fact that humanity depends on the planet for our survival. But what puts that all into jeopardy is today's dominant food model of production, food production, which seems to have created a kind of rift, I think, in this tie. And that dominant food production is mostly defined by industrialization, corporate power, specializing in one commodity, all at the expense really of the environment, human well-being, and local food culture, and respecting and protecting traditional knowledge about food, which I think the two examples that I'm going to talk about will really bring to the fore.
Sandy,
so I guess the concept of food sovereignty is key for a new relationship with nature,
right.
and it's about people's ability to produce and consume their own locally produced food,
Right.
which over time means that they are less vulnerable to shocks, which we've all seen through the COVID pandemic. And I think it's also in direct kind of contrast to this industrial agriculture, which is grounded in the use of fossil fuel, high energy consumption, so the dependence on petroleum-based fertilizers, pesticides, which are bad for our health, erode soil fertility, and pollute water sources, and ultimately fail to prevent hunger. Hunger and malnutrition still exists. So I think,
so Sandy, I just have a question, because I can see people say, yes, it's all good, but if we don't have the industrialization or that sort of that big machinery to produce food in quantity, then we're never going to be able to keep up or to cope. What do you have to say on that? Sorry to dump you in the lines, Dan.
Yeah, I think the voices of our grantees as an organization, that's who we're listening to, and
right.
what they are telling us, which is how we have come to understand the importance of this issue for people living in the global south, who are so dependent on farming and agriculture and agricultural food production for their livelihoods, but also for their ultimately for their survival. So it's those voices and those the same stories that are coming through all around the world.
So when people here by contrast here, and I mean, we're both based in the UK, Laura is in New York, we might have felt that differently lately when the shops suddenly run empty because of some panic buying. Anyway.
Oh yeah, I mean,
and for some people also not having enough money to put food on the table. So can you maybe put this into contrast? Or
yeah, I think yes. I think when you don't feel it, it isn't obvious. But like you say, when suddenly during COVID hits, we're in lockdown, there's no food on the shelves to buy, and we feel vulnerable, and we start to think about it, and we start to think about the connections between health, food, well-being, resilience. How can we prevent this from happening in the future? I guess it's not just an issue affecting people in the global south ultimately. But I guess the two case studies, two examples that I wanted to share really are around agroecology, which is food production based on native crops, so indigenous crops, seed saving, growing using organic methods, so no sort of petrochemical based fertilizers and pesticides. These are strategies that are basically so important in the fight to reduce carbon emissions, but also to preserve biodiversity, protect natural resources. And this is what we mean by food sovereignty. Should I dive into the examples?
Well, give us the example. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
yes,
so
absolutely.
Could you show? Brilliant. So this is a lady called Maria, and I would love to meet her someday.
Let's do that.
Yeah, she lives on the island of Flores in Indonesia. The island is massively impacted by climate change, so changing weather patterns, meaning prolonged drought, very little rain. And they've been encouraged or pushed really to grow rice and maize which ultimately can only really yield with a lot of water. So over several years, these crops have continually failed, and despite tons of chemical fertilizers being used to try and encourage this, the yield to produce, it just left communities in debt and hungry, and faced with the prospect ultimately of becoming sort of migrant workers to survive. So Maria, she decided to do something about it, and she remembered that there was a crop that her ancestors grew called sorghum. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but she went to look for it, and it's basically an ancient crop, used to be grown prolifically over Indonesia, known for its like superfood qualities. I think it's very highly nutritious.
Okay.
And she spent months traveling around, asking elders of each village about this seed, until she finally found it, and it had been dubbed as an inferior crop by the government and was being used to feed pigs, so used as fodder, really.
Oh, like the potatoes back in the days.
Exactly. And so she very resourcefully, she took it back to her community, and Global Greengrants supported her to plant 30 acres. She mobilized the women of the region. It was called Likotuden, I'm probably not pronouncing this right, Likotuden area. Okay. And she revived this old seed variety. It doesn't need as much water as rice. It yields 4 times a year instead of 2 times a year. Yeah. And because it's native, it can adapt to the local climate, the local conditions. So it's really critical in a changing climate. If you flick to the next,
yeah, I just have a little question about.
I can just show you. I can just show you what it looks like.
Okay, lovely. That's it. Oh yeah, it's gorgeous.
So you can see it not only looks beautiful, but these women are, I mean, it's changed their lives. You can see how proud they look just from that photo. But essentially, it's a route for independence for them. So they're broken free from relying on the chemical fertilizers and pesticides, which are very expensive. And then the devastating impacts of drought and this cycle of poverty. It's completely freed them from that. So this case actually has now been spread all over the different parts of Indonesia. So yeah, Maria, an amazing woman, but not only has it brought the community together, it has transformed the economy, transformed livelihoods, protected the environment, and is critical for adaptation to climate change, essentially.
So this is where you see that £4,000 or $5,000 can really go a long way and act in essence like a revolving fund, actually, because if she creates job opportunities, sells more, people grow with this, isn't it?
Yes, and also training other women to replicate in their own villages, empowering more women, transforming economies, changing the relationships, I think, the power dynamics within each community, so women are more independent, they have a voice, and they're more respected for that. So it's really transformational on quite a few different levels.
But I guess they gain also new skills, because obviously, as my little finger told me, that you don't just do the same, it's not the same practice as, you know, cultivating rice and maize, isn't it? There's something more to it. It's a bit more complicated, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to reviving that traditional knowledge about local food cultures and preserving it. So, you know, how do you grow this? How do you maintain it? What sort of fertilizer? How do you make this organic fertilizer that will, you know, nourish the soil, encourage it to grow,
the belly,
help it yield 4 times,
and nourish the belly at the end. Yeah,
exactly. And actually, there's a quote that says. From Maria that says, we all know when we eat sorghum, we feel fuller for longer than eating white rice. And it can be cooked as porridge, made into flour, cooked into chocolate brownies, pizza, or popcorn. So, you know,
God, where do we buy these here? Where do we buy these here? Are they thinking about export? Is that exportable, or do they reach that scale where they can sell in further afield, or does it stay local?
that bit I don't know, to be fair. That's not information that I have about this particular project.
But isn't it maybe
but
contrary to the
certainly-
principle of localization, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think because it's a native to those particular landscapes, to that particular region and geography, then obviously it thrives in that environment, which is what we're seeing when you try to grow rice in a country that's not traditionally grown rice. It's not sustainable. It's not resilient to climate change.
So I was thinking about how can they export their own production further afield, or maybe to further villages, or I didn't know how far their production was.
In the country, yeah, it's a good point. Unfortunately, I don't have that kind of information, but this is, good to.
We can explore and come back. You'll tell us all about it. But that's fantastic story, because in many places, even I come from Brittany in France, and we had these pancakes, or the galettes as we call them, and it's made of something similar to black wheat, and it looks gray, looks very green, but we're very proud of it, because these wheat, this crop grows into very poor soils, and people are just not fascinated because it looks gray and stuff, but it's actually fantastic and very nourishing. So I can relate to that. See, we always have a story, a local story. Tell us more about, give us another story.
Okay, the second one is from Nigeria. And on the left, you'll see, this is Beatrice. She lives on the banks of the Niger Delta in Ogoniland. The backstory to that region, if you move down to the next photo, you'll see it's horrifically sad. Whenever I see this photo, I almost can't believe that this is how it is. But these photos were taken by one of our advisors.
So this is oil, isn't it? On the
this is oil, and this region has been devastated by oil spills for over 4 decades of oil extraction, and affecting all of the shoreline, all of the coastline, which previously was fishing communities filled with beautiful mangroves, which perhaps that are critical in the fight against climate change, the massive carbon sinks. In fact, they are probably about 10 times more effective even than rainforests in terms of the amount of carbon emissions they absorb. So truly critical in protecting these, but these have been devastated all along these shorelines. And, these people have been promised cleanups and that have never happened. So the area is still waiting for this government promise to materialize. But in the meantime, so Beatrice and the other women in the area just, couldn't wait any longer. So amazingly, they took the matter into their own hands, and
literally.
You can see that. And they're doing their own cleanup. So this is an interesting case because 2 things are happening here. One is they're restoring these critical mangroves that I mentioned earlier by growing these saplings, which you can see in a hand. They're growing them from seed and planting them, and are creating nurseries that then they are, trying to kind of proliferate their planting, which, as I said, are essential breeding grounds. So essentially, they've lost their livelihoods. They can no longer fish. The water's so contaminated. They can't really grow things because the soil is just black, as you've seen with oil. Right. So this is obviously one strategy to clean up and restore. The other one is, in tandem, they've developed a business which is growing native fruit trees. And these trees, which I have to say I've never heard of before, but avocado, pear, monkey cola, starfruit, okay, maybe I've heard of that. They were basically on the brink of extinction in the region because they just can't grow in the conditions. But these women have set up this nursery, and with a grant from Global Greengrants, they were able to buy all the equipment they needed to then start to grow from seed and plant these saplings that not only protect these native foods from being extinct, but have also created new livelihoods for them. So they can sell them, they can sell the fruit. And in the process, they are training other women to do it. And what is amazing is that this project has attracted attention from local government. They've seen how successful it is. And Beatrice and other women from it's called the Lokiaka Women Development Centre have been asked to represent constituents within their local government. So that just goes to show how much economic transformation is you know, an outcome of this, what seems like a very sort of environmental project. There's so many different elements
more to that, layers. It reminds me of
from it.
It reminds me of Wangari Maathai's tree planting and efforts back in Kenya, when she also enabled women to know more about planting, more about the seeds, and you don't plant just anything on that terrain because you will create more problems than good. And also she needed to lobby for that kind of reforestation kind of efforts that were totally not appropriate. She became dangerous because she became more political. Do you see that these women also have much more local influence, or how does that work?
Yeah, well, I think it changes the power dynamics in the community. You know, the sort of patriarchal systems that exist, that they're shaken up because women are coming up with solutions and doing it, and gaining respect for it, and gaining dignity, I think. And that is visible and being noticed. And I think, yes, that does create a shake-up in the power dynamics, which, you know, is also central to our work. One of our action areas is women environment, because we know that women are disproportionately impacted by climate change. They are the caretakers of the land. They are the ones feeding their families. They're the first to experience environmental degradation and climate change. So they are the ones coming up with the solutions. I think about 60% of the projects we support, the grantees that we have, are women-led or women-focused projects. And so, yeah, we see this all the time. That's women leading the charge.
How do they share their learning from to you? Are they sharing that with your local advisors, or how does that happen? How do you capture the learning and the achievements?
Yes. So yes, exactly. Our local advisors, they there's two ways we do it. Obviously, they monitor the project throughout the year, offering them advice and technical help and just supporting them through it. And at the end of the year, they do community consultation. And they use the most significant change methodology, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but basically they bring the community together. They ask the community to discuss amongst themselves, you know, what's the top 3 benefits they've seen or changes they've seen in their community as a result of the project. And then they ask them to choose one. So it's very sort of participatory. They're asking everybody to
and people can highlight the direct result to the indirect result of the work.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
Exactly.
And then what do you do with all these results? What do? You put reports together? Where's it going? Do you influence policy? What is it? What's happening? Do you make a big noise? What's going on?
So what we do with that information, so in tandem with the sort of community consultation, the most significant change, we ask our grantees to fill out a very, very simple reporting form with 8 questions, which the advisor helps them on, which kind of, you know, it ranges from, you know, what's the environmental outcomes of your project? How have you felt more connected to other actors in this space? You know, have you been able to mobilize different funds? A range of questions, really. But these are basically our this is from our evaluation framework, and of course we wouldn't put the onus on them to to, evaluate, we then take that data and roll it up with our other analyses into our evaluation. So our monitoring and evaluation framework has these 8 indicators.
Right.
And then we use that to demonstrate the impact of our work, both to our supporters and donors, but yeah, anyone who's interested in our work, basically.
I see.
But locally, like I said, these projects do attract attention, and women and other people involved get asked to take on spokesperson roles for their communities.
So just put into context, you said to me 70% of the world's food produced is by small scale farmers, right?
Yeah.
So it's quite obvious that we need to support them.
Yeah.
The
majority of
what happens if we don't do anything?
I think the climate crisis worsens, the dominant food production system fails further, and more people are left without food, hunger, malnutrition. I think it's a system that's failed, and if we continue on this track, it's just going to get worse. I think COVID has certainly brought that to the fore. I think.
So how does it contribute to that food, to the importance of food sovereignty? That COVID episode that we're not getting out of.
It's a really good question, actually, because I think when the pandemic started in the UK, it kind of resonated. We did feel it because everyone started panic buying, and we were all worried that we were going to have food shortages and we wouldn't be able to get toilet paper and all of this stuff. Not that that's food, but we were worried, seriously, and there was a lot of fear around, being able to get hold of stuff, knowing that supply chains had halted, markets had closed, international systems and global systems, supply chains, etc., had shut down. I think if you translate that into the lives of farmers in the global south, then that fear and that crisis is completely magnified. I mean, those farmers producing single commodities like cocoa, coffee, etc., were left unable to sell their products because international markets shut down.
Okay.
Yeah, and then those who produced for local markets couldn't sell their produce either because local markets were shut. So not only were they cut off from making a living, they didn't have anything to eat. And
there were no distribution system. Yeah.
And this is where the system falls down. We've heard this so many times from our grantees of the last few months that, they want to have more choice in how they produce their food. So our support to communities around this issue has increased incredibly. We're supporting communities to start beekeeping. A lot of communities are starting, the organic agricultural kitchen gardens, smallholder gardens. They want a greater diversity of crops that they can use for themselves. And, in the long term, that means they'll be more resilient to future shocks. I think that all brings it into perspective. But, the positives are that people are thinking about how they can do this. I mean, even in the UK, the number of people wanting their own allotments, growing food in their back garden on the windowsill. I think there's that understanding of the connection to how important locally grown food is. And
or people who are in
to our health.
There is also the case of people in dire situation. Where is the food donated? What is being donated? And we've seen as well the explosion of mutuals, so people helping each other and donating their own food or the surplus food.
No, absolutely.
But there comes the problem of nutrition here as well. I mean, in places that are supposed not to have issues, but they do have issues as well, which is crazy.
I think we're feeling this too, absolutely. And I think, people are also joining the dots and making connections to climate change. If we continue to produce this in an unsustainable way, We're not only, contributing to climate change, but we're, not taking the opportunity to produce food in a way that is in harmony with nature and with our environment. We do have, last year we produced a report actually with a group of grassroots funders called the Klima Fund, and it's we'll share it with you afterwards in the chat. It's called Soil to Sky: Climate Solutions That Work.
Exactly.
And it really evidences with hardcore quantitative data on how many carbon emissions, etc., are absorbed by using these strategies that we're supporting, such as the agroecology method that I mentioned before, going back to native crops, seed saving, seed banks, growing these organically without the sort of petrochemical based fertilizers, pesticides, and the food miles that are reduced as a result.
Please, can you repeat the name of the organization? So I write it.
Oh, it's Klima Fund, CLIMA, and it's a group of 4 funders, of which we are one, all working on grassroots solutions to climate change. And
so I just put it in the chat.
Oh,
for people
thank
who are
you.
interested.
Wonderful.
But I know that we will have more to share with you all after the session in the documents that Laura will send around on top of the recording. Fantastic. So that means you collaborate with other funders as well to really make the case, aren't you?
We do, and you'll see from the report that there are many strategies and many solutions. It's not just about one big intervention, but that these local place-based solutions do work. And I think more and more people are understanding how important that local knowledge and local context specific solution is.
So this is very, very useful. And there's something else as well I wanted to ask you, because when we talk about women, inevitably we're talking about older women, elder women, young women, indigenous women, women in cities, in rural areas, in last mile areas, and women with disabilities. So we talk about intersectionality. And I know that you work intersectionally with women, don't you, at GGF?
Yes, and not just women. Like you just said, women aren't a homogenous group either. So everything's a little bit more nuanced, I guess, than that, as you know. But yes, primarily we work with people who are basically bearing the brunt of environmental degradation, climate change. So that they are directly affected, but they are already coming up with solutions and implementing solutions. So that's the kind of starting point.
So then do you notice there are women? So how do you?
Yeah, and so I guess it's about how are we working with the people who are directly affected. So like I said earlier, women are the first to experience this, the impacts of climate change. So this is why we are working with them, not necessarily the how, but the why. We also work with Indigenous people who, again, are directly affected and impacted, in supporting them to protect their territory. And it's really interesting to look at this. If you look at the stats,
yes, I was about to ask you.
Yeah, I mean, there's only 5% of the population that we call Indigenous people, and they are they own, if you like, 80% of the most critical territory and land and rainforest needed to mitigate climate change. And of course, they have a spiritual connection to the land, so they want to preserve that culture and heritage and tradition, which is so intertwined with it. So they are already protecting.
And they have
Amazon rainforest, Congo Basin rainforest. These are the communities that we're supporting because they are affected and because they are doing something.
And they have also the additional problem or having not always that ownership recognized, if I'm right.
Yes,
you say that,
customary lands and customary law have traditionally ruled, and this is where it comes to the fore, in that governments then are feel they have the right to take away the land for timber extraction, mining, any extractive industry, where those resources are deemed important for the development of the country. So land rights are incredibly important for Indigenous people, which is where we support Indigenous people's struggles a lot around the issue of land rights.
So you've seen,
but we also,
you've helped the. We've seen 2 examples of more mature women, but you also work with young people.
We do, yeah, and specifically we deliberately work with youth because it's a group of our population that generally are the ones coming up with innovative ideas, but often are not listened to or ignored within our culture. They don't know anything, and so Global Green Grants specifically invests in these young people's ideas, and we have actually got a group of advisors who are what we call the next gen, and they make up a board. I think there's six advisors who are from a younger generation, and they focus specifically on climate change and supporting young people's movements and young people's projects around tackling the issue of climate change worldwide. So GGF has a high risk appetite, and I think this is one of the things that makes it quite unique, but also quite special, in that taking a risk on an idea that a young person comes up with is something we feel very passionate, and is very important to hear those voices.
We could go on and on because I've got so many questions, but I'm aware of time, so we need to move on.
Yes.
And
of course,
other people you're working with, I've seen yesterday the Ford Foundation email going around, and they want your advice because they feel that they need to work more with people living with disabilities. How's that popping up? How's that working? Tell me more.
Well, we have a very good relationship with the Ford Foundation, and they know our work, and they've known us for many years, and they approached us around this. It's a very early and emerging intersection with the work that we are doing. But over 2 years, they supported us to make 44 grants to different groups experiencing the intersection of disability and in the environment around the world, actually. And did you just share?
I just shared
the article?
Their message. Yeah. Just share the link to the Ford Foundation.
Yeah, they've written an article in collaboration with my colleagues, Peter Kostashak, and basically there's 4 or 5 case studies in there, which I'm sure you can get a better idea of what this means in different contexts. But it's incredible that disabled people make up 15% of the population, and so traditionally stigmatized, hidden away from society, but they have a lot to contribute. And of course, we all know that environmental degradation leads to illness and disability, so that even more reason for us to really be inclusive and hear the voices of how this is really impacting this critical group of people. So we're that sort of 2-year pilot we are learning from now, and trying to kind of integrate that more into our work around the world. So so
there's a lot to learn and a lot to collaborate on, actually, all of these streams of work.
Absolutely.
So you say that to manage all this and to bring it at scale, we really need a systems change, right? Because that system we're living in now is just not helping. Why is that needed to tackle that environmental and social justice? Yeah,
the 2 examples that I gave, our grantees tell us the food food production system isn't working, this global system isn't working, but that's just one symptom, I think, of a bigger global system, economic system that we're all beginning to realize is broken. It benefits a few, not the majority. You know, it's a system based on exploiting extractors, fossil fuels, metals, timber. This system that's led us to the climate crisis. So, you know, why, if we don't tackle the root causes, then we won't be able to transform. We won't be able to stop the climate crisis, and we won't be able to transform.
And there's much more at risk if we don't do anything, isn't it?
I think, yeah, and if we're not taking this sort of social justice, environmental justice approach, then, you know, we won't have a more equitable future. I think this approach favors, you know, equal distribution of wealth, protects natural resources, and, you know, we want a world where everybody benefits, and where everyone's voice is heard, and yeah. So
I will probably, before we release everybody, that we really need to be clear about our individual homework after we hang up on that session, knowing what we need to do. But before that, it's like, I just want to close the loop and understand how a small grant from your organization leads to that system change.
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, I get asked this quite a lot, you know, what difference is that going to make globally? But I think
you show some difference, isn't it? You show.
Yeah, you know, I think that we have quite a wide lens on this. So it's about the collective impact. So if we're seeding thousands, which we are, of small initiatives to protect, restore, transform the environment, transform economies, then that always up to a larger impact. And I think, you know, supporting women, challenging patriarchy, getting women involved in the political process, this is all how we are going to change the system together. You know, it's not about tinkering it at the edges. It's about, you know, tackling this in a holistic way. So yeah, you know, we can tackle this if, you know, Indigenous people are given the resources they need to scale up protection of the rainforests, for example. We can tackle this if women are equal actors in the food production system. And then, you know, these responses, these thoughtful, mindful responses added all together, we will see these climate mitigation adaptation impacts. But it's something that it's a collaboration, and it's about interventions that are mindful, thoughtful, combined with changes in our behaviors, I think, of course.
So imagine that we are jumping through time a little bit ahead, and we are in 2030. What do you think we would have achieved as a breakthrough? You know, what would have been the intervention that would have led to a massive breakthrough? And you can be bold and you can be crazy when you answer that. Yeah.
It's about scaling up. I mean, going back to these place-based, context-based solutions, it's about more resources to support more of those. And we have evidence to show that it's effective. Of course, we can't do this on our own. We are a small organization.
Okay.
You know, $8 to $9 million turnover a year. You know, we need other actors to take up this cause too, and
task.
and to respond in this way. I mean, it would be great if people wanted to support these groups through us. Fantastic, but also it's about asking yourself, you know, in your niche, how do you support women? How are you thinking about the connections between the food systems, economic systems, climate change, and how are you supporting that transformation? I think the solutions are out there. We know that, and it's not one big intervention. It's about responding to those local
needs.
Needs.
So not everybody has to be a business angel or a social finance provider. They can also rethink the way they first eat their food and consume, but also maybe work, if you're not in Indonesia and with all these great participants that you showcased earlier, and if you are, that's great, because you can directly see how they're working and learn from them. With all the distance, I always forget that we're in this situation. But we can also locally in other countries also be interested in these local food or place-based food structures and see how we can contribute or be part of that. And it doesn't necessarily take more of our time, does it?
No, absolutely. And yeah, if anybody wants to talk more about, there's so many more examples I could talk about in the wonderful work that our grantees are doing. So if anyone wants to hear more about this topic, then I'm really happy to connect afterwards. Also, we have a monthly newsletter that it'd be great for you to sign up to. You can hear more about these stories of impact, these personal stories that are coming through and just incredibly inspiring. Then, I can share that as well after in the chat. But yes,
we'll share in the sort of next communication along. So that session will be recorded. You can look at greengrants.org for the global site, but and you can find the UK website as well from there, if I'm right. Do you want to remind us the name of the site for the UK?
Oh, it's literally one page. I mean, we are a global organization, so we share that website that showcases all of our work.
Oh, great.
There is one page that has our contact details in there.
Excellent. So I put it here. That's more literature. There we go.
Yeah, and that's where you can sign up to our newsletter as well. Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for your intervention, Sandy, and for explaining and for giving us these stories that bring the topic to life and are really breaking down as well why it's so important and where there is friction and why all these groups that sometimes we forget to talk about need to be more visible, and we need to look more about how it affects them, but also what parts they play, because they've got much more to share that we think. We being maybe people who have got the privilege of having full shelves of shelves full of foods that we don't even know where they come from, and are probably not seasonal at all.
Somebody just asked about sharing more stories. They are on our website.
Exactly.
And they are in the newsletters. All the sort of news stories coming through are in our monthly newsletters, where I'm sure there'll be more stories around disability as that work is emerging too.
Fantastic. So more to come in our next communication. Laura, you will send around the recording as well in a few days, as you always faithfully do with all the programs and all the workshops and webinars that are shared through Women from Solutions. Thank you, Sandy. And
Laura, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it, and I hope that I've sparked some kind of inspiration to take action on this, because it's such an important, topical and timely issue that we all need to come together on to change things around. So thank you for the opportunity.
It feels you are in the right job as well, which is great because there's so much passion. Laura, over to you for the closing words.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you, Sandy. It's been really inspiring. Thank you, Servane. You were an incredible moderator. But what really carries all this is that you're really listening to the youth and bringing solutions, and also listening to the women and bringing solutions, because as many people say, the solutions are all there. The thing is that we are not scaling them, we're not implementing them, we're not listening, we're favoring just the few. And maybe this is COVID is a message for this to change at this point, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.